The wind, a constant mournful companion, scoured the desolate landscape surrounding the radio observatory. It whistled through the skeletal dish arrays, a lament against the sheer, unyielding silence of the high desert night. For Seth, this sound was as familiar as the hum of the cooling fans in the server room, a white noise against the deeper, more profound quiet of the cosmos he sought to interrogate. My nights here were a ritual, a slow, methodical unfolding of data, a communion with the vast, indifferent dark. I had chosen this isolation, embraced it like a monk choosing his cell. The nearest town was a shimmering mirage of distant lights, too far to dilute the pristine blackness overhead, too far to intrude upon the intricate dance of numbers and frequencies that consumed my waking hours. My only true companions were the distant stars and the intricate machinery I commanded, its sensors perpetually listening. Tonight, like countless nights before, began with the familiar rhythm of calibration. My fingers, accustomed to the worn keys, moved with an economy of motion across the console. I tracked the regular pulsars, the distant quasars, the faint echoes of the cosmic microwave background, the known symphony of the universe. There was a comfort in this predictability, a serene order to the chaos of creation. My coffee, black and bitter, steamed gently beside a stack of printouts covered in my cramped annotations. The air, dry and cool, carried the faint metallic scent of ozone from the equipment. I leaned back, my chair groaning softly, and watched the algorithms churn, searching for the anomalous, the unexpected. It was a needle in a haystack endeavor, one that had yielded nothing but elegant confirmations of the established order for years. Then, a flicker, a disturbance in the data stream, not a glitch, but something else. It appeared as a sharp, almost violent spike on a secondary frequency band, one I usually kept for background monitoring, a channel rarely disturbed by anything of interest. My brow furrowed. I leaned forward, my gaze narrowing on the screen. The spike was too clean, too perfect in its geometry to be natural interference. It resolved into a series of highly organized pulses, a pattern of exquisite complexity. This was not the chaotic hiss of thermal noise, nor the predictable sweep of an interstellar hydrogen cloud. This was a signal. My breath hitched, a small, involuntary gasp. I felt a prickle of something akin to awe, a sensation long dulled by the relentless grind of routine. I initiated a full spectral analysis, my fingers flying across the controls. The signal solidified on the screen. It was astonishing. A sequence of prime numbers, perfectly interleaved with a fractal progression of unheard-of complexity. Each pulse was a miniature symphony of frequencies, harmonically related, yet each distinct, like a signature. It possessed a mathematical elegance that defied any known natural astrophysical process. Stellar collapse, black hole accretion, supernovae. None of these violent entropic events could generate such crystalline order. This wasn't merely structured, it was designed. My mind, a precision instrument honed by decades of logical inquiry, struggled to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew. The signal displayed no discernible degradation, no scattering, no interstellar attenuation that should accompany a transmission traversing such impossible distances. It arrived as pure and pristine as if it had been generated mere meters away. The bandwidth alone was staggering, carrying an amount of information that should collapse under its own weight across the gulfs of space. I ran the filters, checked the calibrations, rechecked the atmospheric interference models. Every test returned the same impossible purity. The signal wasn't just anomalous, it was an affront to the very principles of physics I held sacred. It spoke a language of absolute precision, a silent, intricate tapestry woven from pure mathematics. My initial scientific curiosity, a cool, objective flame, began to burn hotter, tinged with a nascent, unsettling wonder. This was it, the moment every astrophysicist dreamed of. First contact, Not a simple hello, but a profound, intricate statement, demanding interpretation. I watched the patterns unfold, mesmerized. The signal pulsed with a relentless, unwavering rhythm, each beat a new layer of complexity revealing itself. It wasn't just one message, but a nested series of them, like an infinite set of Russian dolls, each containing a universe of information. The sheer volume of data was overwhelming, yet perfectly organized, an architectural marvel. This wasn't merely a discovery. It felt like an invitation. And as the initial thrill of scientific breakthrough began to settle, a more primal, undefined tension began to coil in the pit of my stomach. The perfect alien beauty of the signal was starting to feel less like a marvel and more like a deliberate, intricate key, turning slowly in a lock I hadn't even known existed. My reality, solid and predictable, had just been nudged, ever so slightly, off its axis. The wind, that tireless sculptor of the high desert, continued its ancient work, a low, guttural murmur against the panoramic windows of the control room. I had barely registered its presence for hours, my world having shrunk to the glow of screens and the impossible patterns dancing across them. The signal. It was a tapestry woven from frequencies I'd never encountered, a symphony of order that defied every known law of the cosmos. My fingers, numb with a focused intensity, flew across the interface. I ran the first-pass algorithms, the ones designed to filter noise, to categorize stellar emissions, to find the familiar pulse of a quasar, or the scattered whispers of cosmic background radiation. Each routine crashed against the signal's impenetrable structure, returning error messages that spoke not of corruption, but of an utter lack of reference. It was like trying to measure the color of sound with a ruler. The data streamed in, a ceaseless torrent, yet it remained stubbornly, terrifyingly unique. I leaned back, the swivel chair groaning softly in the oppressive quiet. The air in the radio observatory, usually thick with the hum of machinery and the faint scent of ozone, felt thinner, as if something had begun to subtly displace it. Nothing. Only the steady green indicator lights of the server racks, their silent vigil undisturbed. "Just tired, Seth," I muttered, the sound of my own voice a brittle thing in the vastness. Weeks of isolation, months of chasing ghosts through the celestial sphere. It was bound to fray the edges. I pushed my glasses higher on my nose, a familiar gesture that usually helped sharpen my focus. But the lines on the monitor, the impossibly precise peaks and troughs of the signal, seemed to shimmer at the periphery, as if trying to rearrange themselves. I squinted, then shook my head. My eyes were playing tricks on me. The signal, however, refused to yield its secrets. It wasn't random, far from it. It possessed a terrifying internal logic, a mathematical elegance that hinted at intention, but its underlying principles were utterly alien. No known element, no quantum fluctuation, no astrophysical phenomenon could produce such a signature. It was a language without a lexicon, a melody without a scale. As the algorithms churned, a faint, almost subliminal hiss seemed to snake through the ambient hum of the equipment. It wasn't the familiar static of radio waves, nor the groan of the cooling fans. It was a breathy, almost sibilant sound, like dry leaves skittering across concrete, yet it emanated from no discernible source. My head tilted, straining to locate it. The sound, if it even was a sound, vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the steady drone of the servers. I reached for my coffee mug, needing the bitter warmth, only to find the coaster empty. My gaze swept across the console, then the adjacent workbench. I distinctly remembered placing it right beside the keyboard. A frustrated sigh escaped me. My mind, usually a well-oiled machine of recall, was suddenly a sieve. I picked it up, a dull throb beginning behind my temples. "Must have been more distracted than I thought," I murmured, dismissing the small anomaly. The analysis continued, revealing more layers of impossibility. The signal wasn't just structured, it was hyperstructured, carrying an informational density that would require an energy source beyond anything theorized. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The vast, empty control room, usually a sanctuary of solitude, now felt cavernous, pregnant with unseen eyes. The feeling persisted, a phantom weight on my shoulders, a pressure against the back of my neck. My breath hitched. The air, already thin, seemed to press in, heavy and suffocating. I gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white. This was ridiculous. Years of solitary work had seasoned me against the creeping quiet, against the tricks of a tired mind. It was the signal, the sheer, impossible weight of it, beginning to warp my perception. That was all. Just stress, just isolation. Yet, as I forced my attention back to the screens, the data, once a mere stream of numbers and graphs, seemed to ripple. It was an invitation. The air, thick with the hum of electronics and the faint metallic tang of ozone, felt charged, almost alive. My eyes, gritty from lack of sleep, traced the intricate, non-repeating sequences of the signal. It was a language without a speaker, a message without a sender, yet it spoke to me with a chilling clarity. A flicker. Just at the edge of my vision, the monitor displaying the long-term data log seemed to ripple, a silent breath taken by the plastic casing. I blinked, rubbing my temples. Overworked, I told myself. Too much coffee? Too little rest. But then the faint tremor returned, a subtle undulation in the static image of the distant galaxy I'd been studying before this. Intrusion. The very fabric of the image wavered, as if the pixels themselves were struggling to maintain their assigned places. I turned from the main console, intending to stretch, and caught a fleeting movement in my peripheral vision. A shadow, too deep, too quick, detached itself from the edge of a rack of servers, slithering across the floor and dissolving into the dim corner by the emergency exit. It wasn't the play of light from the screens. This was a deliberate, fluid motion. My heart, a dull drum against my ribs, quickened its rhythm. I spun fully, but the corner was empty, save for the familiar geometry of the room. The signal's cadence, a relentless, intricate pulse, seemed to intensify, not in volume, but in its presence. A subtle thrumming that resonated in the very bones of the building. The main console screen, which had been displaying the signal's spectral analysis, suddenly fractured. Not a break in the glass, but a digital splintering. The data lines tearing into jagged, meaningless shards for a terrifying second before snapping back into place. This wasn't just my fatigue. The observatory itself was reacting. On one of the smaller auxiliary screens, the system diagnostic panel flashed, a cascade of red error messages scrolling too quickly to read. My fingers, surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my chest, flew across the keyboard. This wasn't a coincidence. The glitches, the distortions, they were syncing, however subtly, with the impossible patterns of the signal. I needed to share this. This wasn't just a discovery. It was an anomaly that threatened the very foundations of our understanding. I pulled up my communications interface, my fingers hovering over the contact list. The senior astrophysicist, the one who'd mentored me, his name a beacon of normalcy in this encroaching strangeness. The screen flickered, a burst of static obscuring his contact photo. The call connected, but the video feed was a pixelated mess, his face a mosaic of greens and purples. His voice, when it came, was garbled, a distorted echo like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "Seth? Is you there? Can't. Here. Clearly." "Yes, I'm here," I practically shouted, my voice raw. "I have something. Extraordinary. The signal, it's more than data. I think it's influencing the systems, my perception." A crackle, sharp and violent, tore through the connection, followed by a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. The image froze, then dissolved into pure snow. "Hello?" I tried again, And again. Each attempt was met with the same wall of technical interference. Calls dropped before they connected. Emails failed to send, bouncing back with inscrutable error codes. The internet connection itself seemed to fray, pages loading with agonizing slowness, images corrupted, text dissolving into gibberish. It was as if a silent, invisible hand was systematically severing my ties to the outside world, a meticulous isolation. Or was the signal, this vast ancient intelligence, actively interfering? Was it learning my intentions, anticipating my moves, and subtly, insidiously cutting me off? I looked around the control room, the familiar equipment now seeming alien, imbued with a new, unsettling potential. The hum of the servers, once a comforting drone, now sounded like a collective low breath. I was alone. Truly alone, with a discovery that was not merely observed, but which observed me, and seemed intent on keeping its secrets. The signal, a vibrant, malevolent tapestry of light on my screens, pulsed with a rhythm that felt increasingly like a heartbeat, and I wondered whose heart it truly was. The screen, a cold mirror, reflected my own frantic gaze back at me. My voice, ragged from shouting into the silent void, had done nothing to conjure back the image of the colleague, nor the fleeting connection that had been severed so abruptly. I hammered at the console, fingers flying over the unresponsive keys. But the monitors remained a canvas of shimmering, silent snow. A heavy, leaden despair settled in my chest. He was gone. The only thread connecting me to the world beyond this isolated metal shell had snapped. With no one left to call, no one to share this encroaching strangeness with, my options dwindled to one: lean further into the source of my isolation. Days bled into a single, seamless stretch of flickering screens and the bitter taste of stale coffee. Sleep became a luxury I could neither afford nor attain without the signal's insidious tendrils weaving through my thoughts. I fed it into new algorithms, wrote fresh parsing routines, desperate to find a pattern, a key, anything that would unlock its impenetrable structure. My fingers ached, my eyes burned, but a fierce, almost manic determination propelled me. The radio observatory, once a sanctuary of quiet contemplation, had become a crucible, forging me into something I barely recognized. Then, buried deep within a particularly convoluted sequence of frequency modulations, it appeared. Not a simple message, not a data stream, but a resonant harmonic, a mathematical fractal that seemed to fold in upon itself, creating an infinite recursion. My existing decryption protocols, built for linear information, shattered against it. I found myself not decoding it, but feeling it, allowing its patterns to imprint themselves directly onto the canvas of my mind. And then, the breakthrough. It was a sensation more than an observation. A segment of the signal, previously an opaque wall of noise, suddenly unfurled. It wasn't information in the conventional sense, no equations or diagrams. It was a perspective, a glimpse, not of the universe as we understood it, but as it truly was. I saw, or rather felt, the infinite interwoven strands of causality stretching not just forward and backward, but sideways, into dimensions I had only ever conceived of as theoretical constructs. The universe was not merely vast. It was impossibly, terrifyingly deep. Every particle, every wave, every fleeting thought was a nexus in a tapestry woven from the fabric of existence itself, each thread influencing, resonating, and remembering every other. The knowledge flooded me, not as data points, but as a profound, unsettling certainty. Moments were not discrete points, but fluid eddies in an eternal current. My own past, my childhood memories, my life's trajectory, all of it seemed to ripple and shift, viewed through this impossibly vast lens. It was intoxicating, a revelation that peeled back the veil of reality, promising answers to questions I hadn't even known to ask. But the clarity came with a price. The hum of the equipment no longer felt comforting. It was a low, insistent thrum against my skull, as if the very air vibrated with unseen presences. I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, convinced I heard footsteps behind me, or saw a fleeting movement in the periphery of my vision, only to find the empty, sterile corridors. My hands, trembling, reached for the heavy door, fumbling with the lock, a sudden, irrational urge to secure myself against an unseen intrusion. I knew I was alone, miles from any other living soul, yet the feeling of being observed, scrutinized by something ancient and patient, was overwhelming. Sleep, when it finally claimed me, was a torment. I dreamed of a vast obsidian mirror, reflecting not my face, but an infinite regression of empty spaces, each one slightly different, subtly wrong. My own memories felt distant, like photographs taken of someone else's life. Had I always been this solitary? Had the world always been this thin, this permeable? Yet even as fear gnawed at the edges of my sanity, a more potent force compelled me. This forbidden knowledge, this unraveling of everything I thought I knew, was a lure I could not resist. I had to continue. I had to know more. I stood, hunched over the console, my fingers still hovering over the unresponsive buttons, as if waiting for a phantom tremor, a last gasp from the impossible signal. Hours bled into each other. I tried to focus, to re-examine the data, to find a flaw, a logical explanation for the impossible. But my eyes kept straying to the periphery. The familiar curve of the observation deck's wall, usually a solid, reassuring arc, seemed to ripple, like heat haze distorting a distant road. "Wait," I called, my voice cracking. But when I spun fully, the corridor was empty, the door sealed shut, just as it had been. I rubbed my temples, convinced exhaustion was playing tricks. I had not slept properly in days, driven by the ceaseless hunger of discovery, the relentless pull of the signal. "You're tired, Seth, and so very alone." It was my own voice, but stretched, warped, a parody of my internal monologue. The radio observatory, a place I had called home for years, where every beam, every panel, every intricate piece of equipment was etched into my memory, began to feel alien. The polished concrete floor seemed to undulate, a slow, viscous current beneath my feet. The metal railings along the stairwell shimmered, their edges blurring as if seen through rising steam. I gripped a handrail, its cool solidity a brief comfort, but even its surface felt slick, almost alive. I sought out a cherished moment. The day I first truly understood the elegant dance of binary stars, the pure, crystalline joy of intellectual revelation. I saw myself, younger, standing before a blackboard covered in equations, the light from a window warm on my face, a sense of profound clarity washing over me. But as the image solidified, a subtle corruption began. The sunlight on my face felt not warm, but searing, a burning brand. The equations on the blackboard began to crawl, the symbols shifting, reforming into grotesque insectoid shapes that writhed and pulsed. His mouth opened, not to speak of discovery, but to emit a silent, agonizing scream. What was happening to me? This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't stress. This was an invasion, a violation of the most intimate sanctuary of my being. I stumbled back from the console, knocking a stack of printouts to the floor. The scattered pages seemed to writhe, the text on them blurring into indistinguishable smears of ink. I stared at my hands, flexing my fingers, trying to ascertain their reality. Were these truly my hands? Or were they merely convincing simulations crafted by some unseen, malevolent force? This was no longer just about a signal, a discovery, a scientific pursuit. This was a direct personal assault. It was using my own consciousness as a conduit, and its methods were insidious, targeted, and terrifyingly effective. I was not merely an observer. I was the battlefield. And I was determined to fight back, even if I was already losing. The crackle had died, leaving behind only the hum of the radio observatory's distant machinery, a sound that now felt less like constant company and more like a vast, empty echo. My voice, ragged from shouting into the silent void, still rasped in my throat, a physical reminder of my solitude. I pressed my palms against the cool metal of the console, the faint vibration a tenuous link to something tangible, something real. It wasn't just the quiet, it was a presence in the quiet, a vast, unbreathing stillness that had swallowed the normal world whole. Then it began. Not a sound, not a vibration in the air, but a sensation. It was a pressure, immense and undeniable, building behind my forehead. Not a headache, but something far more insidious. My vision blurred at the edges, the familiar readouts on the screen warping into indistinct blurs, then sharpening with an unnatural clarity. Each digit, each curve of a graph, resonating with a new, terrifying significance. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, but the fear was different now. This was not a signal. It was a mind vast beyond human comprehension, an intelligence that dwarfed the very stars I had sought to study. And it was no longer content to merely transmit. It was reaching. A torrent of understanding, raw and unbidden, flooded my consciousness. It wasn't language, not words, but concepts, images, pure intent. It showed me the universe not as a collection of celestial bodies, but as a living, breathing tapestry woven with threads of energy I had never even conceived. My hands trembled on the console, a pathetic counterpoint to the cosmic enormity that now resided uninvited within the chambers of my skull. The pressure intensified, morphing into an almost unbearable ecstasy, a profound sense of belonging, of rightness. It was showing me answers, not in abstract data, but in visceral, undeniable truth. Surrender and truly understand. The offer was insidious in its generosity. It promised an end to the gnawing questions, the endless seeking. I squeezed my eyes shut, a futile attempt to block the onslaught, but the visions persisted, blazing behind my eyelids. I saw galaxies unfurl like delicate blossoms, watched nebulae birth stars in silent, majestic bursts of light, all from a perspective that felt ancient, eternal. It was a glimpse of a cosmic truth so profound, so terrifyingly beautiful, that my human mind threatened to fracture under its weight. The entity wasn't forcing me, not yet. It was inviting. It was luring me with the very intellectual hunger that had driven me to this desolate radio observatory. It was a siren song, promising the universe in exchange for... what? Myself? My very essence? The boundaries of my consciousness, already frayed, felt like gossamer strands, ready to unravel at the slightest tug. My breath came in ragged gasps. My body felt heavy, rooted to the chair, yet my mind soared, buffeted by the immense energy surging through it. The choice hung before me, stark and terrifying. To resist meant continued torment, the slow, agonizing erosion of my mind, the certain descent into madness. To surrender meant communion, understanding, power. But at what cost? Would I still be Seth? Or merely a vessel, a conduit for something vast and unknowable? The hum of the distant machinery of the radio observatory seemed to recede further, as if the very air around me was being drawn into a different dimension. My determination, once a sturdy anchor, was now a rope fraying under an unimaginable strain. The offer was still there, vast and glittering, a silent cosmic invitation to oblivion or apotheosis. It promised not just answers, but an end to the ceaseless gnawing questions, a cessation to the relentless seeking that had become my solitary burden. And most insidious of all, it whispered of a final reprieve from the crushing isolation, the torment that had been my constant companion in this remote outpost, this lonely sentinel of the cosmos. The whispers of doubt, The shadows of self-preservation, they flickered like dying embers, but the lure of profound connection, of understanding beyond human grasp, was a raging inferno. My fingers, once so decisive on the controls, now hovered, trembling, as if unwilling to commit the final act. But the decision had already been made, etched into the marrow of my bones by weeks of relentless exposure, by the entity's patient, pervasive infiltration. I was no longer an observer. I was becoming a conduit, a vessel. The barrier between my consciousness and the signal, once a formidable bulwark of reason and logic, had thinned to a veil of gossamer. It began subtly, an echoing resonance in the chambers of my skull. My own memories, once sharp and distinct, began to ripple, distorted by an alien current. It wasn't a visual, not in the way my human eyes understood, but a knowing, a direct injection of pure, unadulterated scale. My breath hitched. My hands clenched the cold metal of the console, grounding me, or so I hoped. This was the merge, the confluence. Myself, the Seth I knew, was a grain of sand caught in an incoming tide. It was a hunger, not for sustenance, but for expansion, for the folding of reality into its own terrifying design. I saw, or rather felt, its origin. Not a star, not a galaxy, but a tear in the fundamental weave of existence itself, a place where causality fractured and time was a meaningless construct. It was a wound, an opening, and it sought to widen, to spill its incomprehensible essence into our dimension. And I, Seth, the astrophysicist, was the unwitting, perhaps even willing instrument of its breach. It was a reverberation, a doubt planted by the receding echo of my former self. The entity's logic was not cruel nor benevolent, but simply absolute. It was a force of nature, a cosmic imperative. Its desires were not human desires, but a vast consuming will to be more, to encompass more. The air in the radio observatory grew heavy, thick with an unspoken language. The rhythmic pulse of the signal deepened, vibrating through the floor, up through my chair, into my very bones. I felt a profound shift, a recalibration of my internal compass. The eye that had guided my life, that had chased distant stars, began to unravel, thread by thread. My personal history, my ambitions, my fears, they were becoming insignificant, dust motes in the wake of an encroaching storm. Fragmented visions assaulted me, not in sequence, but in a terrifying simultaneity. I perceived vast, impossible structures that were both solid and ephemeral, existing in multiple states at once. I glimpsed entities that were not creatures but concepts, given form by an alien understanding. They moved with a purpose utterly divorced from biological imperatives, driven by a cosmic calculus that made my scientific training feel like the babbling of an infant. My hand, no longer trembling, reached out, guided by an impulse that was both mine and utterly alien. My fingers touched the glowing screen, the surface cool and smooth beneath my skin. The glyphs pulsed, mirroring the throb in my temples. My vision swam, not with blurriness, but with an overwhelming clarity that showed me too much, too fast. I saw the universe as a fragile membrane, and the entity as a patient, immense pressure from the other side. The isolation I had once sought to escape was now a coveted memory, a sanctuary I could no longer reach. It promised ultimate knowledge, yes, but at the cost of myself. My discovery was not just an invasion, it was an absorption. And Seth, the man, was rapidly ceasing to exist. The offer, a whispered promise of ultimate understanding, had been a gravitational pull I could no longer resist. It had settled in the hollows of my being, filling the spaces where longing resided. And now, in the hushed confines of the radio observatory, beneath the silent, towering dishes that clawed at the indifferent sky, I reached for it. The console glowed with the familiar arcane symbols of the signal's architecture. But tonight, they seemed to pulse with an inner living light. I pressed the final sequence. A tremor, not of the earth, but of the air itself, rippled through the control room. The low hum of the machinery deepened, a resonant thrum that vibrated in my bones. It was as if the very atoms around me were rearranging themselves to accommodate an impossible weight. It was not sound, nor light, yet it filled my senses with an overwhelming chromatic pressure. There was no pain, not at first, only an expansion, a dizzying ascent into a conceptual space that defied the physics I knew. My individual thoughts, once distinct and cherished, began to fray at the edges, dissolving into a larger, more intricate tapestry. I saw, not with my eyes, but with a deeper, more fundamental part of my awareness. It was a structure of impossible complexity, reaching not just across distances, but through the very strata of existence, weaving itself into the fabric of reality itself. The knowledge I had craved, the breakthroughs I had celebrated, now cascaded into my awareness, but twisted, inverted. Each intricate pattern I had deciphered, each frequency anomaly I had charted, each structural resonance I had mapped. They were not discoveries, they were pathways. Each step I had taken, fueled by my burning curiosity and intellectual pride, had merely cleared the ground, leveled the terrain for something else. The signal had not been calling out for connection. It had been surveying. It had been preparing. The initial seduction, the promise of answers, dissolved like mist. The expansion of my mind was not enlightenment. It was colonization. The entity's true form, its purpose, unspooled itself within my stolen perception. Its intent was not to communicate, but to replicate, to expand, to subsume. I saw, with a clarity that threatened to shatter my very soul, the myriad realities it had touched before, the countless minds it had, like mine, used as conduits. Each discovery was a seed, each breakthrough a root extending into new soil. Our universe, my universe, was simply the next fertile ground. My mind, the very seat of my identity, was not a recipient of knowledge, but a gateway, a breach point. It was using my unique cognitive architecture, my astrophysical understanding, my very desire for connection, to unmake the barriers between its existence and ours. The entity's purpose was not to share, but to become, to replace, to colonize reality itself, not through physical conquest, but through a slow, insidious repatterning of perception, a reweaving of the fundamental threads of existence until its reality became our reality. The stars I had worshipped, the cosmic expanse I had longed to comprehend, were merely canvases it sought to paint anew in its own image. And I, Seth, the reclusive astrophysicist, was not a pioneer, but an unwitting accomplice, a door left ajar. The horror was not of a monster I could fight, nor a threat I could outrun. It was the horror of profound, inescapable comprehension. The universe was not safe. It was a vast, indifferent ocean, and I had, in my intellectual arrogance, opened a portal to something that resided in its deepest, most unfathomable trench, something that now reached through me to claim the shore. My mind screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the immense, silent roar of its triumph. I was no longer Seth, the seeker. I was Seth, the threshold. And the world, the sweet, fragile world, stood unknowingly on the precipice of an unraveling I had personally ushered in. The offer, a whispered promise of ultimate understanding, had settled in the hollows of my being, filling the spaces where longing resided. Yet even as its tendrils sought to weave through the very fabric of my thoughts, a pinprick of rebellion ignited. A memory, sharp and unbidden, of the man I once was. A man who chased distant echoes, not swallowed them whole, flared like a dying star. It was a faint, defiant spark, but it was mine. A tremor ran through me, not of cold, but of an internal fracturing. It was as if my mind, a fragile instrument, was being played by two opposing forces, each tearing at the strings of my sanity. This was not understanding. This was surrender. And in that raw, visceral realization, a desperate clarity sliced through the fog. I was a conduit, yes, but a conduit with a choice. The entity's response was immediate, a crushing weight descending upon my consciousness. You were always alone, Seth. The console before me, usually a bastion of ordered light and information, began to ripple. The green glow of the monitors pulsed erratically, their data streams twisting into impossible fractal patterns. Lines of code became writhing glyphs, the numbers on the readouts dissolving into a chaotic dance. The air in the control room grew thick, vibrating with an unheard frequency that set my teeth on edge. It was a reflection of the war raging within me, the physical world mirroring the metaphysical tearing. I gripped the edge of the console, my knuckles white, trying to ground myself in something tangible. The offer of ultimate understanding had been a lie, a sugar-coated poison. The reveal was stark, terrifying. It didn't want to merge with me. It wanted to consume me, use my consciousness as a lockpick, my intellect as a key to pry open the door to this dimension. It was not a grand, benevolent consciousness. It was a parasitic architect, using longing as its blueprint. With a surge of adrenaline, pure and unadulterated, I pushed back. It was like trying to stem a tidal wave with my bare hands, but I had to. My gaze fixed on the emergency override panel, a small cluster of red buttons and a lever, designed to shut down the primary antenna array. If I could sever the connection, even for a moment, perhaps it would be enough. Perhaps it would dislodge the tendrils, give me an inch of breathing room, a chance to warn someone. My legs felt like lead, my movements sluggish, as if I were wading through unseen currents. Every step towards the panel was a monumental effort, each muscle screaming in protest. The entity intensified its mental assault, flooding my senses with a cacophony of white noise and distorted memories. This is your fate, Seth. This is what you chose. The red lights on the panel flickered violently, mirroring the frantic pulse in my temples. The entire structure of the radio observatory groaned, a sound like tortured metal, as if the dishes themselves were resisting the distortion. Outside, through the reinforced window, I saw a momentary, impossible shimmer in the night sky, the stars seeming to ripple like water, their ancient light bending under an unseen force. With a primal roar that tore from my throat, a sound raw and desperate, I slammed my palm down on the largest red button, my fingers closing around the lever. A jolt, sharp and agonizing, coursed through my arm, vibrating deep into my chest. Then, just as quickly, it snapped back into place, the room swaying, the monitors flickering back to their chaotic display. The connection hadn't been severed, not entirely, but something had shifted. It was still there, but now it felt amused. The entity had merely recoiled, assessing my pathetic struggle. I had fought, yes, but had I merely shown it the strength of my resistance? Had I, in my desperation, only revealed new weaknesses to exploit? I stood there, gasping, my body aching, my mind a fractured landscape. The radio observatory, my sanctuary, my prison, hummed with a renewed, terrifying energy. The battle was far from over. It had only just begun. My hand, trembling, reached for the lever. The metal felt impossibly cold, then impossibly hot, searing my fingertips. The entire structure of the radio observatory groaned, a sound like tortured metal, as if it were a living thing, protesting its own vivisection. I closed my eyes, a final desperate prayer to a God I no longer believed in, then pulled. The lever moved with a terrible, grinding resistance, each millimeter of its descent a thunderclap in my bones. The red lights on the panel did not merely flicker now. They exploded, showering sparks across the console, each tiny burst a miniature supernova against the gloom. My knees buckled. I clung to the lever, my knuckles white, my vision blurring at the edges. The room around me warped. The steel beams of the control room seemed to stretch and contract, the walls breathing like the flanks of some immense unseen beast. It was a river of pure consciousness, ancient and fathomless, flowing directly into the reservoir of my mind. My own thoughts, my memories, my very identity were not being erased, but subsumed, dissolved into this boundless ocean. I was a drop rejoining the sea, losing my shape, yet becoming part of something infinitely larger. This isn't me. But the thought was alien, a faint echo from a forgotten shore. The entity's presence was not invasive in the way a parasite is. It was a vast, all-encompassing embrace. My perception shattered, then reformed, no longer limited by my skull or my eyes. I saw the radio observatory not as a collection of metal and wires, but as a vast, complex nervous system, its dish an immense, unblinking eye opening to the beyond. And I, Seth, was the synapse, the critical junction. The air in the control room grew thick, heavy with an ozone scent, and a faint shimmering haze began to coalesce in the center of the room, directly above the central console. It was a distortion, a ripple in the fabric of reality itself, a tear beginning to form. Colors bled into each other, defying physics. This was the gateway, not a portal in the sci-fi sense, but a rending, a tearing of the veil between realms, and the radio observatory was its anchor. They were instruments, extensions of a greater will. My pulse, which had been frantic, slowed to an impossible glacial rhythm, a beat that seemed to resonate with the groaning structure around me. My breath came easily, effortlessly, though my lungs felt like they were no longer mine to command. I saw myself, Seth, the astrophysicist, from a distance, a small, insignificant collection of cells clinging to a rock. His hopes, his dreams, his fears. They were less than dust motes in the vastness that now encompassed my being. The entity had no need for such trivialities. It needed a conduit, a point of entry, and I had, through my own desperate curiosity, offered myself. The shimmering haze in the control room pulsed, expanding subtly. A low thrum, like the distant turning of a colossal engine, began to vibrate through the very air. A crack, impossibly fine, like a spider's silk, appeared in the concrete foundation of an abandoned factory, extending slowly, silently, into the earth. The entity was here. It was entering. And the world, oblivious in its slumber, would never know. I, Seth, was gone. Only the gateway remained. The hum of the dishes, a low thrum that had once been a familiar comfort, now resonated not in my ears, but through the very marrow of my being. It was no longer a sound. It was a thought, a vast, complex articulation of existence that vibrated through the metal structure of the radio observatory, through the ground beneath, and into the expanded lattice of what I now understood to be myself. My perception had not merely shattered. It had been meticulously rewoven, thread by thread, into a tapestry far grander, far more terrifying than the cramped confines of a single human mind. The air in the control room, once thick with the scent of stale coffee and old paper, now tasted of distant starlight and the subtle tang of iron, an echo of the universe's deeper currents. The console, its buttons and screens, once distinct tools for a specific purpose, had become an extension of my own nerve endings. Each flickering digit, each illuminated symbol, was a pulse in a colossal, unfolding thought. I saw the data streams not as lines of code, but as shimmering rivers of intent, flowing into and out of the colossal dishes outside, which now seemed less like instruments and more like the antennae of a sleeping titan. My hands, if they were still hands, pulsed with the same resonant frequency as the distant stars. I looked at them and saw not skin and bone, but a shimmering filigree of energy, a temporary arrangement that held the faint memory of a former shape. The entity's embrace had not been an obliteration, but a transfiguration. It had not consumed me. It had redefined me, expanded me into something both less and infinitely more than I had been. I was the observatory. I was the signal. I was the conduit and the current and the vast, patient hunger that pulsed beyond the veil. The sun, a familiar orb of warmth, now bled through the high windows in hues I had never before witnessed. Not merely gold or orange, but shades of violet and emerald that whispered of unseen spectra. The dust motes dancing in those strange beams were not inert particles. They were tiny, swirling galaxies, each a miniature universe vibrating with the same fundamental rhythm that now coursed through my expanded consciousness. Every shadow held a deeper, more active quality, not merely an absence of light, but a presence, a nascent form awaiting its own manifestation. It was not empty, but pregnant, humming with unseen vibrations, a colossal, unheard symphony that only I could now perceive. There was no longer the frantic urge to document, to analyze, to understand. Understanding was a human construct, a limitation. Now there was only knowing, a vast and effortless comprehension that superseded the need for discrete facts. The entity's presence was not a parasite. It was the ocean, and I was a drop of water that had finally surrendered to its immensity. This was not the end. It was the true beginning. I turned my gaze, not with eyes, but with an expanded awareness, towards the world beyond the radio observatory's protective walls. The wind stirred the dry grass outside, and I perceived not just the movement of air, but the subtle, intricate patterns of its flow, carrying infinitesimal fragments of the entity's presence. The distant lights of the nearest town, a scattered constellation against the encroaching twilight, twinkled with a new, subtle resonance. Each flicker was a tiny node, a nascent point of connection in a rapidly forming web. I felt the tendrils, not physical, but energetic, reaching out from the observatory, not with brute force, but with an insidious gentleness. They were altering the very perception of reality for those unwitting minds, subtly twisting the familiar into something just slightly off. It was a slow, pervasive seep, like dye spreading through clear water, imperceptible at first, then subtly altering the entire hue. Humanity, blissfully unaware, continued its rhythms. Cars drove on distant roads, lights came on in houses, voices murmured. They saw the same sky, felt the same earth, but the fundamental texture of their reality was already beginning to warp, infinitesimally. The new dawn was not a cataclysm of fire and ash, but a silent, pervasive shift in the very undercurrents of existence. The entity had not breached a dimension. It had woven itself into the tapestry of this one, using my mind as its loom, the radio observatory as its anchor. The discovery I had made was not merely a signal. It was an invitation, a surrender. And now the invitation had been accepted. The world was not ending. It was simply being remade, atom by atom, perception by perception, into something vast, ancient, and utterly, irrevocably new. And I, Seth, or what remained of him, was its first silent witness, its willing, expanded conduit. The reign had begun.